afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Church Resources, a webinar for nutrition in school canteens. I'm Dr. Karen Abbey, and I'm Church Resources Foodservice Ambassador. I'm a food service dietitian, have a PhD in food services. I'm a chef, and I look especially in the area of special dietary and work for the University of Queensland as a lecturer in food services. Thanks, Arbaz. Okay, just some housekeeping, which is always a couple of good things to run through. Firstly, can I have everybody on mute, please? Please check. There seems to be some rattling of paper, so can everyone just check to make sure they're on mute? You can do that going down to the bottom of the screen and just making sure you press the microphone button. There will be time for questions at the end of this session, and we've put a little diagram up to show you where the chat function is, so please use that during the presentation to write down any questions, and when we get to the end, we will certainly be going through those. This is being recorded, so there will be voice and slides that will be posted up on our website for people who may miss this presentation today can come back to, and or at some, when you want a little bit of light, something to, look at night time in your spare time, come and have a look. And we've got some other presentations on there as well, which you can all have a look at on our website. There will be a survey at the end, so hopefully you'll take the time when we send that out to you after this presentation. And also we're going to be having polls. So this is, if you've got a mobile phone handy, this is going to be an interactive session, so you can actually put in the poll number and join our poll questions, and we can ask some interesting stuff. So basically, welcome to our webinar. Thanks, Arbaz. Okay, so as I said, I'm Dr. Karen Abbey. Our other host today is Ian Birrell, is the category manager for the food service solution. We have two guests from our supply partners, Abby Fleming, Goodman and Fielder, National Channel Manager for Healthcare, and Kelvin Kang from Line's Key Account Manager, Hospital and Aged Care, so Line Co Food Services. As we all know, Church Resources is very committed to support our organisations in procurement. I can't stress enough that in times when things are a little bit tight, getting your procurement strategy sorted out is really important. And so we really believe in adding value to our members doing such things like this webinar and resources on our website. This is the first event in a series designed to support school members that are for our education sector, and we love upskilling staff and giving staff knowledge, and whether it's things or things you're going to learn, it's always important. I think we're a constant motion of learning. We like to increase knowledge and support your role in the work you actually do. And we also like to be very practical. I think I should have been born with practical as my middle name. Practical information and resources which you can actually use. Thanks, Arbaz. So today's event, we're going to go through the importance of school canteens. We're going to look at nutrition in that area extensively. We're going to have a look at the dietary guidelines, of course, the foundations of basically the school policy in terms of canteens and how they're run. We're also going to looking at some of those school guidelines for the National Healthy School Canteen Guideline, plus the New South Wales Healthy School Canteen Strategy. We're going to also have tips on how to apply these guidelines to your school, looking at how you can do some menu, how do you formulate menus and recipes. We're also going to have some time to look at some procurement solutions, providing some value to your food services. We've got, as I said, two supply partners who are going to join us in conversation to support canteen menus. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you about the resource for school canteen menus. Thanks, Arbaz. So diving in, I think it's really important. I mean, not just for school canteens, but also if you've got like colleges and boarding schools where you've got obviously students who are there all the time. Particularly the school canteen guidelines really refer to canteens. However, I think the principles of how they're designed, which is based on the healthy living principles and the healthy nutrition standards, that we incorporate those sorts of things when we're talking about nutrition. So school canteens, I think, play a vital role as a source of nutrition for students daily when they come to school. And I understand that not all canteens run Monday to Friday. Some do, some don't, some might run just alternate days. But they do provide an opportunity for students to actually obviously, have something to eat. They provide nourishment for healthy growing bodies and minds, which is absolutely critical for children, which we have to always consider to make sure that they're getting good nourishment because they're obviously growing and it's the time of development and that's where they need the most nutrients. And it supports young people to learn about food, healthy foods and food costs, which is important also so that, people learn where food comes from and the fact that how it gets combined to actually make meals that are hopefully nourishing and yummy for our students to eat. Thanks, Arbaz. Okay, well, let's dive straight into our first Mentimeter. So if you want to go to your phones and go onto your search engines, and what you do is we will then bring up a code, and so you go to www.mentimeter.com. So we'll give you everyone a little bit of time to type it into a search engine on your phone. Now the question is, so the code you have to put in is 7390487, and you go submit, and then basically it brings up your first question. So how helpful do you find the National Healthy School Canteen guidelines when planning your canteen menu? And so what we'll do is you can start to see that the little pie chart starts to grow as we get more and more people who are putting in. Okay, got some mixed answers. We'll just give everyone a little bit of time. We have got quite a few on now. So for those who are just joining us, if you go to Mentimeter, www.mentimeter.com, and put in the code 7390487, then you can actually participate in our first poll for this afternoon. Okay, so somewhat helpful, not helpful at all, helpful. Okay, I think the one thing I'll just talk about the National Healthy School Canteen guidelines. They're very complex, very interesting. There's lots of obviously tight rules around what can be served in canteens, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as we move through this presentation. But that's great. I think we've got all our respondents in. So if you'd like to actually go to the next slide, Arbaz, that'd be great. Okay, so about 50% thinks they're somewhat helpful. All right, so let's talk about the Australian Dietary Guidelines. Now, this is obviously the basis for the canteen guidelines in Australia. This is actually the overarching foundation piece for how all policy is developed for nutrition for everybody except for the aged care sector. And basically everyone else uses the Australian Dietary Guidelines. So basically what they're designed to do, I suppose, is to provide some guidance and a platform. So the things the guidelines really want to harp on is healthy weight, be physical active, obviously choose nutritious foods and drinks that meet your energy needs, enjoy a wide variety of food from the 5 food groups, and limit intake of things like saturated fat, added salt, and added sugar. And the dietary guidelines are predominantly designed so that we prevent chronic disease from forming. And chronic disease actually begins very young if people are not, or children not actually eating very well. So again, chronic disease costs a lot of money. It's a fortune in this country in terms of health costs. And so obviously we want to be preventing that from happening. And of course, if school children are actually exposed to either weekly menus or they're actually exposed to even canteens, then they need to be learning the principles around the Australian Dietary Guidelines. So can we just go to the next slide? Can I just ask everyone to make sure you're on mute, please? That'd be great. So what are the 5 food groups? Well, the 5 food groups really are the foundations of how we will eat. And this is where we base off the dietary guidelines. And of course, they're very simple. There's a vegetable, fruit, grains, meat group, and also the dairy group as well. Okay, and each of those actually brings some specific nutrients to the diet. And that's why we want to encourage people to eat a wide variety of foods over the 5 food groups. So basically, if you're talking about vegetables, they predominantly bring things to the diet like vitamins and minerals. Fruits, again, vitamins and minerals with some antioxidants. Grains are the fibre and carbohydrate sources of our diet. We have lean meats and things like tofu or nut seeds and legumes and beans. They bring protein and iron to our diet. And then we have things like the dairy group, which is the milk, yogurts and cheeses, and they predominantly bring calcium and protein to our diet. Now, all of these foods actually provide energy, and they provide energy in many different amounts. But generally speaking, this is what we want people to be eating day in and day out, basing their meals, basing their canteen menus, basing their menus on the 5 food groups so that we're actually picking up these sorts of foods. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the lists, but generally speaking, the 5 food groups are actually really important to be our foundation of what we actually eat daily. Thanks, Arbaz. So what does that mean? So if you had to say how many vegetables, how many fruits, grains, meats and dairy, what does that actually mean? Well, as you get older, the actual serving sizes change. And so this table here really shows you that from 4 to 8 years, all the way up to 14, 18 years, the different kinds of serving sizes that are required. So for example, for a 14 and 18-year-old young man, basically vegetables will be 5.5 serves. Whereas, for example, a girl who might be a young lady, basically her serving size is about 5. Now, this is not hard and fast, okay? If you've got children who are highly active, people running marathons, people doing all sorts of different kinds of physical activity, you may find those sorts of numbers switch around. There's no hard and fast rule. These guidelines are to, I suppose, prevent obesity, but if you've got very active kids and active young people, then these serve sizes certainly can go up and down. Okay, but here's just a general guide of how we actually should spread the 5 food groups out over a day. And it doesn't mean, for example, if you haven't got, like, you might have vegetable-hating young people and they might eat extra fruit. You can always compensate by eating some groups more than others. And it doesn't mean you actually have to meet these serve sizes every single day. You could literally, have only 1 serve of fruit one day, but you might have 3 the next. So the 5 food groups is something that gets balanced over time, over the day, over the weeks, over the months, over the years. But the idea behind these servings and the 5 food groups is to encourage people to eat wholesome, nourishing foods. Thanks, Arbaz. So what is a serve? Now, this is the trick. Anyone can overeat and get obese, and I think everyone would really understand the fact that our young children, our young people are more obese than ever, and that's because they're all probably sitting on couches and doing the getting out the phones and the Xboxes and that sort of stuff. So critical to the 5 food groups and to the serve sizes is actually how much activity people are doing, and we all need to exercise, including young people as well. So these serve sizes basically just help kind of, I suppose, lead people to understand that if you're going to have a serve of vegetables, it's half a cup cooked green or orange. A serve of fruit could be 1 piece of fruit. Grains could be 1 slice of bread or half a cup of cooked rice. Lean meats can be something like 65 cooked lean red meat, or 80 grams for poultry, or 100 grams of, say, for a fish fillet. It could be 30 grams of nuts, those sorts of things. And then finally, the dairy serves are around 1 cup, for example, is a serve, or half a cup of cheese or yogurt, or 1 cup of a milk alternative. So it's really important to understand that when we see these serving sizes, they are just a guide. And there's no reason why a healthy young teenage boy, for example, could be knocking down 5 glasses of milk in a day. It doesn't mean that's a bad thing. Generally, the body can lead people onto what they require to eat, so long as people are active as well. And obviously children and young people are growing, and so therefore they do need extra energy and nutrients to help that process along. The problem comes when we actually get to things like our discretionary foods, and I'll have the next slide, Arbaz. And that's exactly what we're talking about. So this is one of the areas of issue. So if, for example, you take those serving sizes and you absolutely ate 3 loaves of bread a day, or you just packed it out and ate and ate and ate and ate, everybody's going to put on weight. Everyone is a balancing act. Everyone has like energy in, energy out, and if you have too much energy going in and not enough energy going out, then you will actually put on weight. That's how that happens. The problem with, obviously, our food supply is that it's loaded up with a lot of discretionary foods, and a discretionary food basically is all the sorts of things that don't fit into the 5 food group model. So they're obviously the foods that are high in saturated fat, sugar and salt. They are usually lower in fibre, and they're really high in kilojoules. So a discretionary food would be a can of soft drink. Now, if we all went away, and even if young people went away and drank 5 or 6 litres of, or even 2 litres of soft drink every day, generally speaking, unless they were burning it off like running a marathon, they would probably put on weight. So the discretionary foods are actually things that we can eat, what we call occasionally, and not all the time. That's why they're called discretionary. And you'll see as we go through this presentation, there's actually, I'll show the Australian Healthy Guide to Eating, and we'll see where those discretionary foods fit in. But generally speaking, they're the sorts of foods we want to make sure people aren't. And these are the sorts of foods that you probably would not find readily on canteen menus, okay? But let me just stop and say that everyone likes to have a treat every now and again. And that's, again, understanding how to use the food supply, learning about how to eat within the food supply is actually important skills we need to be teaching our young people. Next slide. So basically we're going to get into a little bit of this, the guidelines now around school canteens. And of course, Australia, I don't know why we can't just have a national standard that every state does the same, but here we are. So they're kind of based on the kind of same principle. New South Wales is probably the real outlier, but generally speaking, they are all based around the 5 food group model and the Guide to Healthy Eating. But they're just called a few different things across Australia. So we'll move on to the next slide and we'll start talking about how these guidelines work. So the National Healthy School Canteen Guideline, I'm sure you've all seen this, where green is always on the menu, amber is select carefully, and red, of course, you cannot use. So we'll just go to the next slide. And what does that actually mean? Well, of course, the green foods are really based around that 5 food group model, usually fresh, usually minimal processing, and things you have to kind of put together yourself. So things like sandwiches and nice healthy cheese or meat sandwiches or salad sandwiches, it's always fresh fruit or cut up fruit. It's using things like low fat dairy foods. It's also using things like all that natural stuff. So vegetable sticks or things like a sort of a curry dish with rice, those sorts of foods. So that's what the green are, and they're always present on the menu and are encouraged to be obviously put on the menu. Amber's a little bit in the middle. It actually, we'll talk about it in a bit more, but amber basically is where you kind of meet some of the criteria and they can sometimes be used on the menu. So they're one of those things that, you know, there's only a small portion of the menu can actually be made up of amber, whereas the bulk of any canteen menu could actually be made up of green, for example. The green always to use foods. Next slide. So amber is, yes, the foods that are used less occasionally, and they're more higher in saturated fat, sodium and sugar. And there is some guidelines, if they are higher in fibre, they can actually be used. Okay, the idea about amber foods would be try to move them to green, and that's where you use, obviously we'll talk about this, menu planning strategies and meal preparation strategies to actually move amber foods to more green and get them, you know, more solidly on the menu. Thanks, Starbase. Now the red obviously is not recommended at all. And that's because they're those discretionary foods. They're the ones that are basically got high sugar, high saturated fat, low fibre, high salt. Usually they're foods that have very poor nutrition value. So what do I mean by that? Okay, let's just take your can of soft drink. When you drink a can of soft drink, it actually only contains sugar. Now, that's fine, as I said, if you're off to run the marathon or you just want to have a bit of a drink, and you don't do that too often. But on average, a can of soft drink can have anywhere between 11 to 13 teaspoons of sugar. Now, to burn off a teaspoon of sugar will probably take you about 7 minutes of probably walking to actually burn off. So you can imagine how much walking you'd have to do to burn off a can of soft drink. The other thing about those sorts of foods, if you're a healthy growing body and you only have, you know, you're only a small person or you're a very tiny little eater, you want to try and make sure you're actually getting foods that are high in nutrient density, okay? And that's not soft drink. So when you're looking at these red foods, they're actually got very poor nutrition. It's the same for lollies. They're just made up of sugar and nothing else. I'm not saying kids shouldn't have treats. What I'm saying is too much treating actually, I think, is leading to our obesity issue with children, and also over portion sizing is the other issue as well. So the reds basically mean you shouldn't be putting these on the menu at all. I think canteens have really changed from the day when I was actually in school. We used to have all sorts of yum stuff in canteens. And the reason why is because when I was younger, we didn't have the level of rates of obesity we've currently got now with our children. And unfortunately, with high rates of obesity, it leads to all sorts of other chronic diseases such as diabetes. And diabetes, especially the type 2 diabetes, which is brought on by obesity, we see a lot more of our younger population coming down with diabetes, which is not good for, obviously, you know, for the rest of your life as well. And don't forget, the reason why we have dietary guidelines and we use like healthy dietary principles and 5 food groups is so that we actually reduce chronic disease. And the canteens and even boarding schools or colleges should be designing their menus so that they actually make sure they're hitting green kind of amber foods all the time and not red. But that's the reason why. Red basically has poor nutrition, only adds energy, and if that energy is not burnt up, it, you know, can lead to children becoming obese. Thanks, Arbaz. So I'm sure you've all seen this. This is the traffic light system. And I suppose it's a really easy way to obviously remember how this works. So green, amber, red. Green, go. Amber, get ready to stop. And red, obviously, you have to stop. And I think it's used widely across Australia, except in New South Wales, which has changed to a very different system, which I'll talk about in a little while. But generally speaking, the track lesson is pretty easy, even for children to understand, basically how to divide foods up, say which ones are the better to eat, which ones are the ones that give you obviously more nutrition, and the ones you should have sparingly occasionally. Thanks, Arbaz. So how to decide if a food or drink is suitable for a healthy school canteen? So everything gets compared. There's a set of guidelines. You can actually get the Healthy School Canteen guideline off the website. But basically, it's comparing the green, the amber, and red categories. So everything that's fresh basically fits into the green category really easy, and that can be sold. That's not a problem. And if it fits easily into the red category, then it's not to be sold at all. For all other foods and drinks, you have to obviously refer to tables, and we'll go through a couple of examples as to what is necessary and what actually assess to make it either an amber food, or what can you do with that food to actually push it into the green zone, and therefore it can be sold. Now, there is some thresholds around amber, so I'm going to just take a little time to explain this, because I think there's a couple little simple rules. So firstly, if you have a food that is actually has a high energy, saturated fat, sodium, okay, so it may be under the threshold, but over the threshold for fibre and meets all the other criteria, then it can be sold as an amber. If it's over the threshold for saturated fat, sodium, and also under the threshold for fibre, then also it cannot be sold. So when you look at the tables that are actually in the canteen guidelines, they actually show you what you can actually, how you can line up products. So you can read labels that way to see where they actually fit in terms of whether or not they can go on a menu or they're not on your menu. And I suppose in doubt, you just leave them off. But the majority of school canteen menus must be green, and green with a little bit of amber, which is actually really important. So we'll just go to the next slide. So there's nutrition criteria tables, which I just spoke about, which actually can help you determine what that actually looks like. So food categorized as amber must meet nutrient criteria. Now, sure, if you're going to have a fruit salad, you're pretty well going to know that that actually is going to be obviously a green food. If you have something like a fruit muesli bar, you would have to read the label to see actually where that's sat in terms of its sugar and its sodium and its energy and its fat content, okay, and even its fibre content. So I just want to stop. So the major nutrients that these guidelines are really targeting is sugar, sodium, saturated fats, energy, total energy, and also how much dietary fibre. And foods that have higher dietary fibre can sometimes offset if a food has a little bit of a higher sugar, sodium, or saturated fat content. So you just need to obviously look at labels and see where they all sit, and we'll go through a couple of examples. So the food is being assessed as less than equal to the number of specified in energy, saturated fat, and sodium column, and more than equal to the number specified in fibre column, including things like hot food items and processed meats and snack foods all do need to be looked at. And as I said, anything that's red is just red and it just doesn't get sold. So we'll have the next slide. So here's an example for all of us to look at. Sorry, it might be a tiny bit small, but basically this is an example of crumbed chicken patties, and this is taken out of the guideline. So if, for example, you look at the criteria in table 1, and it talks about the fact that you've got the energy has to be less than 1,000 kilojoules, the saturated fat has to be less than 5 grams, and the sodium has to be less than 400 milligrams. And as you can see by this chicken patty, it's got 900 kilojoules, it's got 2.9 grams of saturated fat, and it's got 300 milligrams of sodium. So it actually does fit within the guidelines. So what happens here is the fact that this food is classified as amber, and it can be used because it contains less than 1,000 kilojoules, less than 5 grams of saturated fat, and less than 450 milligrams of sodium per 100 grams. So of course, this product can actually be used on school canteens. So when food manufacturers are looking at these guidelines, this is what they're targeting. They're going away and doing formulations and changing their products to actually meet these guidelines, so they can then come out to you all and say, we've got this product and it's actually amber and here's the nutrition, we've worked it out, we've changed the salt, we've done all sorts of reformulation so we can get it onto your school menu. And basically that's what they've done. And so you can see all sorts of companies that come up with like pies that are, amber, they've got, you know, other sorts of slices and cakes which may be amber or even green, pushing them so they actually get into the green. And we've had lots of students who've actually done some work with from the university who've done some work with food manufacturing companies who've just done that exactly thing. They say, we've currently got an amber product, how can we make it push it into the green? So that actually can be used on school canteen menus. Thanks, Arbaz. So making a healthier choice is really important. And I think, you know, not all foods are going to meet the criteria as amber. So this little slide here with this diagram actually does show you the criteria in which you can go through and work your way through to see where products actually fit. But again, it's really important to know that, again, that key nutrients that it's targeting is the saturated fat, the sodium and the sugar, looking at fibre, and then ultimately how many kilojoules is a product actually providing. Thanks, Arbaz. So here's an example, and this is actually a recipe that we've formulated as part of our resource, and I just have to apologise, the round sodium thing seems to have fallen up a little bit, but generally as you look at this example, we've come up with a dip that is actually using obviously some dairy foods and some other products, other ingredients, and what we've done is we've actually done a nutritional analysis of that, and then we've used the canteen guidelines to say where does that actually fit. And so what we've actually done is that it actually meets a green food. It's a green because it has less than it has definitely less than 5 grams of saturated fat, and the sodium is only 50 milligrams, which is 400 less than what you need for the guidelines. So basically that definitely falls into the green. And honestly, you can really see it does anyway, because it's raw vegetable sticks, and it's actually a dip that's made out of obviously some dairy foods with maybe a little bit of flavouring, a bit of cucumber and things like that. So again, so how do you actually make up your recipes and things to actually fit the school canteen guidelines so you can actually, you know, obviously sell things? And again, this is the same process that food manufacturers go through as well. Thanks, Arbaz. Okay, so here we go again. So for all those who've got their phones ready, for those who joined us a bit late, let me just quickly go through this process. So we're on Mentimeter, and basically we just need to add the poll question. So the poll question's coming up. So which of the following is an example of a green food according to the Healthy Nutrition Canteen guidelines? Is it fruit salad, fruit cake, fruit muffins, or fruit slice? Okay, we'll just give people a couple of minutes to see how they go. Now, I'm just going to talk about this as these results come in. Clearly the answer is fruit salad. If you had to just take green, it actually is fruit salad without a doubt. However, I'm going to say something about the fruit cake, the fruit muffin, and the fruit slice. If, for example, you plan the recipe correctly, i.e. reduce sugar, add some fibre, reduce saturated fat, so you don't use butter, you might use a polyunsaturated margarine, you do all those sorts of things, you can actually turn fruit cake, fruit muffins, and fruit slice into green foods as well. So again, it just comes back to what the recipe is, how the recipe is designed, what is on labels if you're buying products in, and it also just comes back to how things are prepared. So anything really can, well, I could say, I won't say every food can be a green food, but there's a lot of foods that may be sitting in the amber category which can be pushed green if, for example, they're modified and they're changed. But that's correct. Everyone was right. Most of us were right. So basically, fruit salad is correct. Thanks, Arbaz. So greening the menu. Obviously, we want green and amber, maybe sold through school canteens. You think of foods as sitting on a spectrum. The aim is for all foods and drinks sold in school canteens to be as close to green, close to the green end as possible, and that's what we're really aiming for. So can we just have the next slide, Arbaz? Okay, so if you're actually making foods for the canteen, or you're doing some recipe design, even in colleges and boarding schools, I think there's some really good tips you can take in terms of how to make your canteen foods greener. So we're just going to go through these really quickly. You can choose products with the least amount of saturated fat, sodium, energy, and the greatest amount of fibre. So you get out your labels if you were buying things in, or you'd be looking at recipes or doing nutrition analysis to actually work out what those recipes were providing. Promote food categories as green. in meal deals. So you might have meal deals with the students or things that are on sale. So you actually promote the green, obviously the green meals or the green items more than amber items. Keep the serve size small for food categories such as amber, and sometimes reducing the portion size may actually flip it a little bit closer to green. When making sandwiches, rolls, wraps and burgers, choose whole grain, wholemeal and multigrain bread. Add salad vegetables and low or reduced fat cheese. Each additional vegetable moves the sandwich closer towards the green end of the spectrum, which is important. And when making pasta, choose fresh tomato or vegetable-based sauces, add vegetables and low or reduced fat cheese, which is a way to go as well. Next slide. Other tips, when making pizzas, choose a pita bread base and top with lean meats, vegetables or low or reduced fat cheese. Again, when making muffins, reduce the amount of sugar. Now, I can speak because I cook all the time and I write heaps of recipes. Really easy. Sugar would be one of the most easy things to take out of a recipe. I mean, sometimes when you see a recipe's got a cup of sugar, you go, really? Does it need a cup? It clearly doesn't. You can sometimes reduce the sugar by 1/3 to 1/2 and absolutely make no difference to the recipe and how it comes out. So, of course, you can, if you're going to take sugar out, you can replace with puree apple. You can use mashed bananas or berries. You could use artificial sweeteners if you want to as well. Just don't go overboard with those. Or you could try maybe a different type of sugar, like even something like rice syrup, for example, actually has a lower sugar and carbohydrate content. And you can replace half, and looking at flours, for example, you can actually do half and half wholemeal to self-raising to actually increase the fibre. And the only thing I'm going to say about when you do that is make sure when you increase the fibre, you increase the fluids in people's diet, because increasing fibre without increasing fluid will lead to constipation. And also you might need to, in the recipe, when you do kind of a half-half mix of plain and or self-raising plain flour, you might find you might need additional fibre as well. You can also do things like putting in psyllium as well, and that actually can also increase the fibre, but again, you're going to have to probably adjust the fluid. When making milk drinks, choose low or reduced fat milks, add low or reduced fat yogurt and fruits. Okay, avoid probably the toppings because they're really high in sugar, unless you can find ones that are made purely on like a fruit puree, for example. Those things are important. When making soups, choose low or reduced stock, add herbs and spices and vegetables to make them really tasty. Choose sauces and mayonnaise that are low in reduced fat, low in reduced salt, and sparingly. And Marcel's is one of the best brands on the market. It's one of our supply partners, Marcel's, and they've got some really good low reduced stocks and stock cubes you can powders. And basically serve cereals with low or reduced fat milk as well. And for those who are running breakfast programs, of course, breakfast is one of the most important meals of the day. And obviously, if you're doing a breakfast program at your school, technically it's probably not quite the canteen, but again, really important to think about, you know, the toast that's going to be a whole meal, or even fruit toast, or looking at things like fruit yogurt, even healthy wholemeal pancakes for breakfast mixed with some blueberries and things like that. Thanks, Arbaz. Okay, so that's basically what happens with the rest of the country. Now let's just have a little bit of a closer look what's happening in New South Wales school canteen strategies. So they used to be on the traffic light system, and that changed. They've gone to the Healthy School Canteen strategy, classifies food and drink as either everyday and occasional. So this is a bit of I think it's very much like the traffic light system. If you think about the traffic light system, everything has to be green and a little bit has to be amber. You nearly say, well, 3/4 of the menu has to be green and 1/4 of the menu has to have, you know, obviously amber. Anyway, so this table here just basically shows you the fact of what they're suggesting. So 3/4 of foods and drinks have to be everyday foods. The occasional meals have a specification around the Healthy Star, and I'll talk about that in the slide. And then what that actually means and how that functions. You've got to obviously look at portion limits for occasional foods. And they're looking at portion sizes, which I think actually is really important as well. We can all overeat. And then obviously they've got this thing where they've got I suppose it's they've got a promotional aspect to this, which I think is really interesting, where you've got to display the favourably priced products. Like you've got to display the everyday foods, and the ones that are maybe occasionally they're kind of in the background a little bit. And then their clear guideline for this for New South Wales is sugary drinks should not be sold in New South Wales canteens and vending machines at all. I think. I don't think that at all is there, but there's certainly a food that I don't think, you know, kids probably get enough of that when they actually go home. So next slide. So again, I talked about this a couple of slides up when I talked about the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, and the New South Wales guideline for everyday foods, I think, really bats straight off this. So this is a really good guide to have a look at, have this hanging up in your school, and certainly teaching children what this actually means. So that's designed on a plate and clearly just running from the top. Obviously, water is the preferred fluid. And there's obviously got to be things like, you know, obviously breads and cereals, you've got your veggie group in there, you've got your fruit group, you've got your dairy group, and then you've got your protein group from your meats and meats alternatives. So that's basically the everyday foods. And what they're saying is that the occasional foods are those discretionary foods we discussed before, which are basically all your chips, your lollies and your chockies and the, you know, some would argue the most tasty stuff, but generally speaking, they're your occasional foods. And then obviously what they're saying is things like sugary drinks and stuff should actually not be used in canteens at all. Okay, and certainly even things like, we can talk about fruit juices. Yes, they're actually high in sugar because they're actually made on fructose. So there is, I think, an understanding required between what different sugars do in the diet. So we've got milk products, for example, they're also got maltose in them, so they're also high in a milk sugar as well. So I think it's actually a little bit of common sense, and actually realising that, you know, sometimes fruit juice is a good way for a person to get vitamin C, as is milk is a good way to get calcium and protein. So again, I think it's actually looking at what foods do, how much they're actually being sold, and then what actually has happened, and how they're actually used in terms of your canteen menus. Next slide. Okay, so the Health Star rating basically is it's like your fridge. You know, you got your energy ratings on your fridge, exactly the same thing. It's voluntary, so therefore it is not compulsory for all food labels to have it. But gee whiz, can it save some time? And the reason why it saves time is because it's put on the front, and it means if you pick up 4 products that are the same, and just say you've got 4 different cakes, you can look across those cakes and realise there could be a cake there that actually has a 5-star rating, and that means that it's going to be the lowest in sugar, lowest in saturated fats, lowest in sodium, probably have really high fibre, and obviously has been deemed and meets all the principles around this star system. And that automatically gives you a good idea that this is the product you should be choosing. So how does the star rating work in terms of New South Wales? Well, products that actually can be assigned to the occasional must have 3.5 stars. So how does it work? 1 star or half a star is obviously the product is, you know, obviously got higher fat, higher salt, higher sugar, and as it moves around, those components actually get smaller and smaller and smaller. And as I said, the occasional foods for the New South Wales guideline need to have 3.5 stars and above to be accepted as part of the occasional foods. So again, this is a really good, quick and simple, if you're not into label reading, this actually does help sort out what you should be including even on boarding school and college menus, in terms of, like, you know, trying to make sure that the food products that you're using are going to have those higher, you know, higher fibre and the less nutrients of saturated fat, salt and sugar, which is really, really important. Okay, next slide. Oh, sorry. Okay, so guides to healthy school canteens. Okay, so again, looking at what you've got to determine everyday to occasional foods. Obviously, you're going to stack your menu full of everyday foods, and then you're going to obviously just have some of the occasional foods. And of course, the occasional foods, according to what the New South Wales guidelines actually say, have to be kind of hidden away and not kind of, like, you know, being advertised, which is important. Okay, and they must actually fit that 3.5 star. So again, the New South Wales guidelines probably a little bit easier in terms of the fact it's just got like 2 camps, foods that you can actually have. And I think they've got some really clear guidelines as to how they can be shown, sold, and also what that means. And they use some labelling support, I think, to help to sort out what those parameters actually should be in terms of making sure you can have those as an everyday or an occasional food. Next slide. Okay, so you want a guide to healthy school canteens. It's obviously balance your menu. Now, look, everybody should be balancing menus regardless. Okay, so whether or not you're a college, you're, you know, you've got your boarding school, or you're actually even in a canteen, you must actually balance your menu, i.e. you must put probably the 5 food groups first, lots of fresh stuff, lots of things that aren't being processed, things that you can put together. So we come along with that kind of fresh idea about how food is prepped. Okay, you want to try and have everyday foods in the New South Wales guideline at least 3/4 of the menu. And of course, you want to make sure that you're not promoting the least healthier choices, but you're promoting the healthiest choices. And really, you should probably do that across all canteens, regardless of where you are in the state, because you want children to learn, or young people to learn, what really are the healthy choices to choose from. Thanks, Arbaz. Okay, so this is just an example of a menu, which is obviously 3/4 every day. And just for the exceptions of this menu for New South Wales, for example, the daily snack pretzels were obviously in the occasional, and you've got a flavour of the day thick shake that was on their menu. They basically was the occasional. And then obviously packaged ice cream was occasional foods. So you can see this menu is really packed out with obviously the, you know, healthier choices, and the occasional ones are the ones that are kind of like down the bottom, and there's only a few on the menu to choose from. Thanks, Arbaz. Okay, so let's go for Mentimeter again. So basically everyone gets to their Mentimeter, so you should just open it up. Okay, so it'll come through. So the question is, what is the most popular food sold in your canteen? Now this is a word cloud. So what that means is you have to type a word into the box. So enter a word, and it could be whatever you want. We don't mind about spelling mistakes, so don't worry about that. So basically, okay, and how this works is, for those who've never seen a word cloud, the biggest word, or the one that's the biggest in font size, is actually the word that is basically the one that sold the most. So here we go. So it looks like sandwiches is currently winning. We've got homemade pizzas. We've got fruit salad, chicken burgers, steamed dim sims. Okay, hot chips, which is fantastic. Okay, so you can see if there is a variety of different foods that are actually sold in canteens. Fantastic. So we might go on to the next slide. Thanks, Arbaz. Okay, I'm going to bring in one of our supply partners. This is Abbey Fleming, the National Channel Manager of Healthcare Goodman and Fielder Limited. And we're going to have a little bit of a chat. So thanks, Abbey. So we're going to have a bit of a chat about bread in school canteens and what does that all mean. So next slide, Arbaz. So Abbey, can you just talk through with us some of the lunchbox trends for 2020?
Yeah, sure. So there's been I'm echoing.
We're not echoing here, so.
Oh, okay, that's all right then. I'll just have to not confuse myself. So there's been a fair bit of difference, I guess, between pre-COVID times and COVID times. I think is probably one of the biggest trends that is coming out of 2020, where a lot of parents are actually sending their kids to school with packed lunches versus more than what they were doing previously. And then the other major trend is that there's that kind of, I guess, mum guilt around trying to give them something that's healthy versus give them something that they actually will eat. So I guess it's a constant juggle of trying to find that balance between the two, which is a lot of what you've already kind of been talking about. How can you make something fit the guidelines or meet the guidelines, that type of thing.
That actually gets eaten.
Yes.
It's true. I think a lot of people would probably remember, I mean, you know, lunch boxes coming home, you know, empty. Oh, no, sorry, lunch boxes coming home not eaten. I don't know what the kids are eating during the day. It's just amazing sort of stuff. I mean, I remember going off and having like little cheese sticks and little cups of grapes and things, and like sandwiches and all that sort of stuff. So I think that when I went to school, Abbey, there probably wasn't the range of breads that are available now that parents can choose from, or even canteens can choose from, to actually make sandwiches. So have you seen a change to like maybe white versus wholemeal versus grain bread?
Look, it's been, I think if you look at the two core, or I guess the market leading products that we have, which is your Helga's and then your Wonder White, Wonder White seems to be quite a game changer in the kids space, in particular with the release of the Wonder White Active, which is the only low GI bread that's on the market at the moment. There's been a lot of stuff that's happened in that space in terms of fortifying bread. So I think that basically the goal has been to make the healthiest kind of white bread possible. And then with your Helga's range, there's obviously a lot more diversity in terms of different grains and seeds and stuff like that that are used to produce the different varieties.
Just for everyone who may not
Yeah.
know, sorry, Abby, just to let everyone might not know, the glycemic index basically is a way in which, just to explain it, is a way in which glucose is released into the body. So as you know, bread is made up of obviously carbohydrate, and the lower glycemic index bread means it stays kind of in the stomach longer and doesn't release a high, doesn't release glucose. So there's a slower insulin response to the actual release of that bread. So I think it's actually a bit more filling. And it's also, as I said, just digests slower, which is actually a good thing for also releasing energy slower into the body. Sorry, Abby. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So I guess to answer your question, when I was in school, all I knew was white and brown bread, and it certainly has evolved, well past that these days. If you look at Wonder White alone, you've got high fibre, and you've got low GI, you've got fortified with vitamins and minerals, you've got iron. All of those things can kind of be put into a single serving of bread, which is going to boost the nutritional value of that quite significantly over a standard white loaf.
Excellent. Baz, we might just have the next slide. And so, okay, so this is some of your range. You talked about the Helgas. What about things like, I'm fascinated by wraps and how they're currently being used in school canteens, or even boarding schools.
Yeah, well, look, I know personally, you can use wraps to make pizza bases and stuff like that, which is often sometimes a healthier option, which gives a little bit more nutritional value than a standard pizza base. But there's a lot happening in the wrap space within Goodman Fielder. There's, we're bringing out digestive wellness wraps and lower carb wraps, and you've got mixed grain wraps. So, the sky's kind of the limit in terms of what you want to create. You can have them fresh, you can have them toasted. As I said, you can use them on pizzas. There's a lot of stuff happening there.
You could probably even use things like making them into Mexican dishes. You can actually break these up and tear them apart and actually cook them off and make up like corn chips. So instead of using the corn chip, which is actually probably higher in fat, you can actually break up like wraps and cook them off and make them like a little chip. And I think that would be a lower fat and also a more healthier option than just diving into the corn chips, which are obviously
Definitely.
very yummy, but sometimes they're not. So I see that your Helga's wraps are obviously amber. Is it one of Goodman and Fielder's goals to maybe push a bit more into the green space in your wrap area?
Look, that's probably a question better answered by the NPD team, but I know that there's always work in that space to obviously, meet consumer requirements and to make them as healthy as possible. They're always working on new ideas and ways that we can reformulate to make the products the best option possible for people.
Cool. Okay, might have the next slide. And so we have, obviously you've got the Mighty Soft range. I think a lot of people, and the Wonder White range, I think that's the brand that, apart from Helga's as well. And I think it's really interesting that if we just look at the way in which you've got obviously the whole meal with iron, you've got the Wonder White with high fibre vitamins and minerals, the high fibre sandwich, the high fibre wraps, which I think is fantastic. So some of those really do tick those key points in terms of the planning for canteen menus. The putting in some vitamins and minerals, putting in some iron, and obviously increasing that fibre content, which is really important. So I think that's really great. So any other developments that are happening with Goodman and Fielder you'd like to share?
Look, there's always stuff in the pipeline, and as soon as I'm allowed to talk about any of that new innovation, I will. I guess just to finish up, looping back to the lunchbox trends. I think it's stated that 21% of parents associate high fibre as the best possible bread for their children. So, the Wonder White range definitely meets those requirements quite well. And obviously, when you loop it back again to the Australian Dietary Guidelines that you were talking about before, having whole grains and having high fibre is the best possible option for that grain serve that you need to obviously have anywhere between 4 to 7 servings of per day. So,
and I think
yes, there's a lot of options there.
Yeah, and just one thing just in conclusion with Abby, it's really important, I think, our little busy people, sometimes our little people our young kids are very busy and sometimes don't have time to eat, or they get very picky and they don't want to eat food. I know I was a pretty fussy child, but we all survived to grow up. But I think it's really just good to notice how you're putting in like your Wonder White vitamins and minerals as well, trying to actually, make sure children are getting, so if they only want to eat bread, and that they go into a bit of a bread phase and they get really picky and fussy. I mean, I think it's good to see products that are coming out that actually do have fibre, but also vitamins and minerals, or even iron in them to actually help children get the nutrients they need. So that's great. So if anyone, thanks Abby, if anyone has questions for Abby, just put them in the chat function. That would be great. And thanks if you want to go back, turn your camera, go to mute. That was great. Very helpful. Thanks, Abby. Go to the next slide, Arbaz. So I'd like to introduce Kelvin Kang, who's basically the Lions Key Account Manager, Hospital and Aged Care. Do I have Kelvin with me? There he is, just popped in. So obviously Lion has a wide variety of obviously different milk and different juice and yogurt products. So Kelvin, what's the role of dairy and juice in school canteens? Have I got Kelvin? No.
Is that better?
Oh, you go. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah,
That's
I was just
right.
saying that most aged children aren't getting enough of dairy each day. So both our plain flavoured milk as well as our yogurt can help. Can count towards the dairy serves per day. So even juices, for example, with no added sugar counts as an occasional serve of fruit. So certainly the importance of dairy for children is quite important, and milk naturally contains source of calcium, healthy bones and teeth, and many other benefits.
Well, I think one of the benefits of actually dairy foods is the fact that it's got protein, which I think is really important. And it's a really easy food to knock down. So if you have to have a glass of milk, you can just knock that down really quick. So basically, it's really important that for children have about 3 serves of dairy a day, if not more, to actually make sure they're building their bones. And the most important thing about this presentation is the fact that when we're talking about building bodies of young people, it's actually the body they're going to build for the rest of their life. So really important that we really try and make sure they're getting the spread of the 5 food groups and getting those essential nutrients. So if you think about your bones and your teeth, not so much your teeth, but your bones, you really have to solidify your bone mass by the time you get to about 30. Failure to do so, and you will actually have a lot of problems later in life with things like osteopenia and osteoporosis. And so while we think children are invincible, and the fact they all run around and, they're growing up, the younger years are really the most important to make sure they're actually going to develop good lifetime habits for obviously eating and drinking, but also they're going to get essential nutrients. And I don't think you can really state how important the dairy food group is. So we'll just take the next slide. Thanks, Arbaz. So come and talk to me about your primary school priority range recommendations.
Yeah, so with the primary school, we've got our couple of ranges. So you've got your big M or M to go, your 250 ml range, which fits into most, which is a green category for most schools. And then you've also got the 300 ml flavoured milk, as well as some juices, yogurts as well. In fact, all our yogurts are in the green category, especially the smaller pack size. And then you've also got Quelch, which is, similar to Zupa Dupas, which is quite popular among school kids. And then we've got our milk range as well. You've got your, obviously the larger pack formats, but we've also got our smaller pack formats, which is like the 150 mils. So those are the range that we suggest for primary schools.
Okay, we'll just take the next slide. And then you've got your secondary school.
Yeah, so the key difference between the primary and the secondary is that with the secondary school, there's slightly larger pack formats for the flavoured milk, as well as the yogurt options, as well as some schools tend to offer some iced coffee, as well as Zupa Dupas, which is again always very popular with school kids. But apart from that, the range is fairly similar, with an exception to slightly larger pack formats for high schools.
And do you find the flavoured milks are popular with canteens?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So the 300 ml flavoured milk, because it's fresh milk, it is quite popular. And then we tend to back it up with the long life flavoured milk, which is for the smaller canteens that don't really want to be getting too fresh milk. They can hold on to the long life milk that little bit longer.
And what do you sugar it with? So obviously milk's naturally got lactose. So how do you then sugar up your Like, what do you add in to make your flavoured milks?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been working on as a business is our goodness promise, and part of that goodness promise is actually reducing the amount of sugar that we put in our products. So, but it's kind of getting on to one of my other slides. But by the end of 2025, we aim to reduce our added sugar in all our products by over 1 million kilos across all our products. So, which is fantastic for the consumer as well as all our customers as well, that what you are selling is a product that's from a business that really cares about the consumers and that really cares about reducing the amount of added sugar that we have. So certainly something that, milk naturally has sugar, and what we're planning to do is reduce as much added sugar as possible.
Cool. Okay, next slide. Oh, good. 1 million tonnes, hey? Or a million, what did you say, 1 million tonnes?
1 million kilos. 1 million kilos.
1 million kilos, okay.
Yeah. Which is quite substantial.
Okay. Well, it's still a lot of sugar. So basically then you got obviously your flavoured yogurt range as well. And obviously I think yogurt, again, important product because it's not only high in calcium and protein, but also has what we call our probiotics in it, which are really important for gut health, which I think is everything. We all need good gut health. So yes. So what about your range of yogurts?
Yeah, so with the yogurt range, what we do have is we've got your smaller pack sizes, whether that be the 100 grams or all the way through to our 160 gram yogurts. And I guess the wonderful thing about yogurt, it's got all the 8 essential nutrients, including your calcium, protein, vitamins, and the benefits of probiotics for gut health. And it's such a functional food. You can almost have it any time of the day, whether that's morning in the breakfast or, school, the recess or lunch, or even afternoon as a snack. So very, quite functional and obviously quite delicious as well.
Yeah, it is true. Okay, we'll just go to the last slide. Well, the next slide, sorry. And so this is what you're talking about, your goodness promise, about, obviously taking out like kilograms.
Yes.
I don't know why I'm talking about tons today. Kilograms of sugar to actually, meet targets. And of course, I just want to emphasize, when you're talking about pure fruit juice, that's pure fruit juice, and that's just pure fructose. So again, people sometimes get that a bit confused, saying, oh, you shouldn't drink fruit juice, but actually, yes, you can. The problem with fruit juice is it's like, 5 pieces in one serve. Like, when you drink it, it's actually equivalent to X amount of fruit. But it's great for obviously young people who are very active, who are maybe doing marathons, who would need obviously to replace their energy. But it's still important. If you don't like eating fruit, like if you don't like actually eating fruit, and sometimes you want to get vitamin C, sometimes you have to drink juice. But yes, you can't pull out any more sugar from 100% fruit juice, and that's what's really important, isn't it? That's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so again, I say you're going to reduce some sugar, and I think that's really good. We'll have to see how that goes for you in terms of you make that goal. But thank you, Kelvin. Now, if anyone's got any questions for either Abby or Kelvin, please put them in the chat function, and we'll be getting to those really shortly. So thanks, Kelvin. Thanks for that. It was really interesting from both Abby and Kelvin. So we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so this is the resource. So we've actually made, with all our webinars, we make a resource or two to actually share with our members, and this is the resource we've been putting together. So we made up a canteen menu, and these recipes can also be used if you've got a boarding school menu or a college menu. And again, so there's about 18 recipes, and what we did was we went around and found out, or we nutritionally analysed them, I should say. That's the more thing to say. So basically you can actually see that the recipes, and you've got the green or the amber, and that's what each recipe card looks like. So there's our banana and oat breakfast smoothie, which actually is a green. And so all those resources are put together into a little booklet or a little thing which you can get. If you fill in our survey, we'll be more than happy to actually send one of those to you. So I'd like to go to the next slide. And we are building a resource library on our website, which is coming along nicely. And you can actually go to there and look at all the other resources that we've been building for every single webinar. So just really quickly, I am a supply partner also of Church Resources. And so we offer all our members preferred rates as well. So if you have any problems with your canteen menu or recipes and you need some help with that, we have services which we can actually, dietitians that can actually help you with that as well. And just you can also join my free newsletter as well, which is at nacc.com.au, which comes out weekly. And then basically the other thing I do is I have a research institute, and I actually think the area of children nutrition is something we really, there's lots of energy in that space, but I think we actually need a little bit more in terms of can we prevent the chronic disease rates that we've currently got in this country. So I think if you're interested in finding out about the Institute, you can just find out that through my newsletter anyway, because it's actually in there. Next slide. Thanks, Arbaz. Boris. So I'd like to introduce Ian Birrell. He's been patiently waiting, and he's just going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the Foodservice Church Resources offering for our members. If you're unfamiliar with Church Resources, and Ian will tell you all the good things about what we do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karen. And firstly, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's attended this wonderful educational webinar from Dr. Karen again. And we look forward to having many more as well. As Dr. Karen said, my name's Ian Birrell. I'm the category manager for both food service and the travel solution. And I really serve the requirements and needs of all our members. All of you would have received the email, and therefore your organisations would already be members of Church Resources and our parent company, Procurement Australasia. And membership includes access to our Excellence in Food Service program, which today the webinar is part of. For those of you who don't know too much about us, we are an aggregated procurement company, essentially a buying group. We've been functioning for well over 25 years, and we aggregate for all sectors, so whether it's aged care, the healthcare, education sector, and the welfare sector. We, the Church Resources brand, we really specialize historically in the not-for-profit sector, and that's where our absolute expertise resides. And we're very much viewed as an enabler or a trusted advisor, because at the end of the day, we're after the best interests of our members. So we're really seen as that trusted advisor in between the members, and being able to access wonderful contracts with great additional value adds. Being a buying group, we utilize the combined buying power of all our members' spend to enable us to achieve not just a really competitive price from our supply partners, but also other additional value adds. And things like today, having two senior key account managers from each of our supply partners is really a really good example of that. We do partner with Australia's leading and iconic companies, Lion Dairy and Drinks, which used to be part of Dairy Farmers, or was Dairy Farmers historically, and Goodman Fielder. We have Bidfood in the CDF category. Then we have in the grocery areas, companies such as Nestle and Unilever, Arnott. So they're all brands that everyone would know and see in their supermarkets whenever they're there. As part of our services we provide to our members, we provide a analysis and benchmarking service. So essentially that's where we take the, I guess in the situation of today, for the two most popular categories within the school sector for us is bread and milk. We would take an invoice, 1 week's invoice, and basically compare that to what it would look like if that particular member was under Church Resources. So not just from a service point of view, but from a pricing point of view as well. And that's something that we do for our members free of charge. We have educational events such as the one that we're carrying out today. This is our first educational event for a little while, and we're certainly looking forward to having more. But we also do carry out these events for our other sectors such as aged care. And through our website, procurementaustralasia.com.au, we have food service blogs. So we send out food service blogs fortnightly. There is also a library of blogs available within our website that you can access, and they have a range of wonderful recipes or educational blogs and information that you can access free of charge. So that's all through the Procurement Australasia website. Next slide, sorry, Arbaz. Thank you. And these are just three examples of the website, I guess, of website articles that we produce. So they're not just information on recipes and new products that are coming out and new products that are due to come out, but also on the education and the information that is so critical and important for our members to know and be aware of. And we provide this all as free of charge for our members to access. So it's certainly a really good point of call going through the website. And with that, Dr. Karen, I will hand back to you.
Thanks, Ian. I'll have the next slide. Okay, so we're getting down now. We'll start answering some questions, but just in summary, I think school canteens are very important for what I've said today in terms of teaching young people about good food, good way of putting food together, making healthy choices. I think it's really, really important. And of course, healthy eating for our young people, I mean, you cannot understate how we need them to have good health as they move into their adult years in terms of trying to reduce the chronic rates of disease we have in this country. I think the guidelines are very interesting, and I think they provide some really solid foundations in terms of how to help canteens, or even, as I said, schools or colleges, to obviously put together menus that actually are high in that green, or high in the, obviously, the healthy choices, or the ones you should use all the time kind of categories in terms of how you plan those menus. So I'd like to actually thank all our speakers today for coming on board with us. Thank Abby and Kelvin for being with us. Now, we will have a survey, and we'll send that to you after this webinar. It's usually sent a day or two afterwards. And it actually gives us, please take some time to fill it in. And we're going to also send off our resource when we do that as well. We just want to make sure that we, as this is our first education one, we'd really like to know areas in which we can do other webinars and things to help people, and so that we can actually get some ideas from you. So if you can just take a little bit of time to do that, that would be fantastic. Next year we will be planning more education events, so please give us some ideas. I think, you know, we could certainly, a couple of things I've just kind of noted down as I did this presentation in terms of other exciting presentations for next year are going to be planned. So as I said, make sure you're getting our newsletter so you can be informed, and if you'd like to subscribe up, if you haven't, or get other schools to come and join us, this is actually a free service, so we'd be more than happy to have other people join in our webinars as well. Next slide. So if you have any questions about today and you'd like to either contact Ian or myself, feel free to contact us. I don't mind taking the odd phone call, so if you want to give us a hoy, that's no problem at all, neither does Ian. We're here to help you. We're here to try and help you, obviously, you know, get the best procurement strategies possible. We're also here to help you with any strategies as well. As I said, if you need help with menus or recipes, I'm more than happy to get in there and help you do something in that space. So we'll go to the last slide. So I'd like to say thank you for everyone for participating, and now we'll open it up for questions. Thanks, Ian.